Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight at M Pavilion Parkade as we have a conversation about, is temporary the new permanent? We respectfully acknowledge that we are meeting tonight on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Bunurong Bunwurrung peoples of the East Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their land, their ancestors, their elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge that our conversation tonight on temporary practices in public space, especially over the last year, is just such a tiny amount of time within the tens of thousands of years that Aboriginal people have lived on this land. We have so much to learn, and we're committed to a journey of reconciliation, strengthening relationships between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. Wow, what a year. Look at this, look at us all. We're here in Parkade, in person. It's fantastic. Give us a woo. That's good. And we're about to have a conversation about public space experiments in our city during 2020 and beyond. Outdoor dining, pop-up bike lanes, play streets, placemaking. Never before have we seen such an insurgence of temporary experiments in our city. Since COVID, we've sought new and creative ways to enable us to safely gather, dine, and move around our city, still bringing us together while keeping our distance. Around the world, we've seen a rise in experimental use of public spaces, especially in our roads, our streets, and our car parks like this one. And we've quickly adapted and trialled new ways of doing things during a pandemic. So what did we experiment with in 2020? How did our neighbourhoods look and feel different? And importantly, how has this changed our attitudes to temporary interventions? We have an amazing lineup of speakers here tonight as we explore the role of experimentation in creating better cities. So I'd like to introduce to you, right here, Will Coogan, experimenter with temporary interventions in urban places. Will is place manager at Mullins City Council and will be bringing a focus on outdoor dining. Thanks, Will. We've got Barb Champion, executive director at Play Australia with extensive experience in leadership, education, arts and health, and all things play. Barb will be sharing her expertise on the program 1000 Play Streets, among other things, Barb, I'm very sure. Next, we have Will Fuchs, a leader in transport planning and tactical approaches to delivery, having worked in Europe, South America, and Australia. He is Director and National Transport Planning Lead at GTA, now Stantec, and leading our discussion tonight on pop-up bike lanes. Helen Rowe, urban innovator, promoting more effective ways to manage change in cities. She's held leadership roles in state government as Director of Sustainable Transport, as Head of Innovation and Strategy at Co-Design Studio, and currently completing a PhD at RMIT. Helen has been a co-creator of this event, and very big thank you, Helen, for all of your work getting this up and running. And we'll be challenging our thinking on experimentation as a tool for change. And over there in the last seat, Matt Novichevsky, researcher, planner and placemaker focusing on new ways of working with place in cities, currently completing a PhD at University of Melbourne and director at Sage Leaf Place. Matt will bring discussion on placemaking and place identity to the conversation. So very big thank you to all of our panellists this evening, and what an amazing bunch of people we have here for this conversation. I'm Alyssa McMillan, I'm City Resilience Officer at City of Melbourne, and I'll be moderating our discussion here this evening. So we're going to be starting with a few targeted questions to the panel. I'll then open up to some open questions to them all, and then I'll be coming to you as the audience if you've got questions for this fabulous bunch as we go along. Okay, let's get started. Helen, I'm coming to you first.
Ready.
Ready? Great. Can I start with you to provide some context? All around the world, we've seen an increase in temporary public space projects since COVID-19, as we've quickly tried to adapt to life during a pandemic. The practice of tactical urbanism isn't new, but we've never seen it on this scale before. What do you think we've seen, or why do you think we've seen such an interest in temporary urban projects? And what do you think we've learnt from the experiments of the last year?
Thanks, great question, Alyssa, and thanks for putting the event together. We all appreciate having an opportunity for a whole bunch of city nerds to get together in one place in the city. We've very much missed face-to-face interaction. Yes, a great question, and I think the obvious answer, I think, in the last 12 months has been that temporary projects have let us adapt to the conditions of COVID. Our cities needed to be, I guess, retrofitted to that condition. So we needed more space to be together while apart. We needed space to be able to walk around and bike around because maybe we didn't want to hop in our car or we weren't that going to be comfortable getting on public transport for a short period of time. So it just gave us, a quick fix during COVID. And I think that's been... But I guess going back to you mentioned the term tactical urbanism, which has been used for the last, at least 10, 15 years. And the idea of tactical urbanism is testing out something in a short term that's something you want to achieve in the long term. So you think, well, it's great to have more bike lanes in the city. Let's just try it out in a short term thing. So it's kind of been accidental tactical urbanism. We've done some quick fixes, but I think you can look back at it now and think about that as an experiment and think, well, we kind of accidentally experimented through this period and what have we learnt from it? And I think just in a general sense, what we've learnt is we've got a whole bunch of new experiences to compare. So you think about, I know this week outdoor dining in Yarra was getting a bit of discussion because all the traders have experienced the car park outside their house being a trading area, not a car park, and they can compare that. The other thing I hope we've learnt from the experience is making it much easier to do experimentation. We've just done so many of them at a scale we haven't done the last 10, 15 years, and the process can be really hard doing something temporary on a road space where things are used to being permanent. So I hope we come out of it and have learnt how to make it easier for people in cities and local government and state government and everybody to experiment more, and we've made it and enable that to happen and say yes to that more often.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? And it's not just been here, it's been other places in the world as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Paris has rolled out, hundreds of, I'm sure you mentioned it, but, much bigger scale than even here of bike lanes to adapt to that. You're seeing cities around the world creating more places for pedestrians, creating places for outdoor dining, places for events. I mean, everything we do in our life, we've got to be further apart now. So we're trying to expand our city spaces within the existing city that we have.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's go to an example. Will, you're leading Mullins City Council's response to outdoor dining. That was a really exciting moment in September last year when the Premier announced $90 million in funding for outdoor dining for local governments across Victoria. There's now 280 businesses in Mullins that have parklets, new footpath trading permits or road closures in place for outdoor dining. Can you tell us a bit about the journey and the response at Mullins?
Thanks, Alyssa. I guess the first thing to say is anyone who lived through Melbourne last year will remember Friday the 13th of March where we were all sent home and told that, that was it. We were going to be in lockdown for an indefinite period. And I think we'll all remember that till the day we die. That's for sure. And look, all levels of government, including local government, had to kind of just, send all their workers home, close all their venues, close all their premises, figure out what we could do to help people get through this really uncertain period. And for me, someone who works in urban kind of stuff, I guess, is the best way to describe it. There was nothing directly for us to use our expertise on, immediately. And then when we started around August, clearly someone in Dan Andrews' office was talking to someone in New York or something like that, and they're talking about road closures, they're talking about really pushing this really hard. So we were starting to get inquiries from businesses who'd been closed for the last 6 months or whatever, and they're going, so look, what are you going to do about this? What are you doing? And then there was a lot of internal chatter, and as some of you probably know, sometimes local government moves slowly. All levels of government can move slowly. So it's like, no, here's a chance to actually move really, really fast. And I remember personally, I took inspiration. There's a guy in the WHO, I think he's the second in command guy, and he's got some quote or whatever, speed trumps perfection. Don't worry about getting it right. Just do it fast. Do it as fast as you can. Sure, you're going to make mistakes. That's okay. Just move on. So we're like, how can we do this as fast as possible? So what we did is we pulled together what we called a task force, which Alyssa was a key member. And we said, so what are our existing processes? If you wanted to do a parklet, or if you wanted to do dining on outdoor, if you wanted to do all that, what permits would you need to get through? And we kind of mapped them all and went, geez, that's a lot of permits. Do you really need to do that? Do you need to do that? And when you get this permit, do you actually need to submit all this information? Not really. Every week. And we kind of figured out that you don't actually need most of that stuff really at all. And the great thing was there was great will within all the different branches within Moreland City Council. Loads of great staff here, by the way, from Moreland. Thanks for coming. There was really amazing goodwill within the organisation to say, yes, we're going to do it. We're going to break down our old permit system. We're going to revise our entire way of doing things to make this easier for everyone. And that was just so refreshing to have that kind of impetus to say, yeah, we're just going to change all of our previous processes and make it as easy as possible for the applicants. So that was just wonderful to see and do.
It's amazing what a pandemic can do, right, for the planners out there in the audience. And it's incredible. Everyone did bring the yes culture. I think that's something that was really important during that time. You know, no wasn't an option when you've got to roll out across the whole, the whole municipality. A whole lot of outdoor dining and businesses that are really, really wanting this to happen. It had to be quick. No wasn't an answer. Local laws were being changed almost overnight, and it was incredible.
Absolutely, and as you say, no wasn't the answer given. It was yes if you can meet certain conditions, and we'll do everything we can to help you get there. And areas that previously would have said no, or we don't have time, or we're doing whatever, it's like, no, this is a priority. We're going to change all our systems and we're going to issue these permits in 3 days or something ridiculous, whereby previously it would have been 3 weeks or more, So that was wonderful.
Yeah, it's great. I'll be coming back later to talk about things we want to keep from the temporary, and that might be one of them, I'd say. Was going to show you something, but it's not working. Everyone, just one moment. I'm going backwards and I'm sorry, but it's the only way. Here we go. Just a couple of pickies as we go through the next couple of speakers in case, you haven't seen outdoor dining, although I'd be very surprised if anyone hasn't. But this is a fantastic extra super long parklet that's in Moreland. I like to call it the sparklet because it's, super long. There's...
The boardwalk. That's what we call it, the Ligon Boardwalk. And that's a really great one where council was a bit more proactive. We said this area of southern Ligon, the street just widens. It is a tram route, but there was a spare kind of parking lane, and it's full of hospitality businesses, 14 hospitality businesses, I think. So we said, let's just do it ourselves. Let's just build a long parklet and make it really pretty and really nice, and we only spent 90 grand of Dan's money on that for 13 businesses. So I think it was well worth it in the end, and it's great. People love it.
Fantastic. All right, we'll be coming back to you in a sec, Will. Other Will Fuchs. Similarly, we've seen a huge investment from the state government in pop-up bike lanes with 100 kilometres of new and improved routes for inner Melbourne, in addition to the 40 kilometres of protected bike lanes that are being built by City of Melbourne. Another extraordinary project helping people to move around during COVID. Can you tell us what's made pop-up bike lanes such a success?
Yeah, thank you. So I've just rewritten my notes because you were reminding me what it was like last year when we started doing this work. And I think I wrote down one thing, and someone once described what I do as transport stuff and things. And it's similar to planning and things. And I'm from the private sector, and so we had a lot of uncertainty because, we're very... I remember someone saying, what's our pipeline? And we'd never really worked out what our pipeline was. And so we had to work out this pipeline, and then we had to work it out the year before, and we weren't sure because we didn't have any data. So there was a whole lot of uncertainty in the industry, which had this sort of huge motivational impact. And then a client came along and said, would you like to work on this project doing pop-up bike lanes? And not only are we all passionate cyclists, but it was a great project. And needless to say, the team just, we went full bore on it. And I've heard that come out from a lot of people in terms of the motivations behind what they were doing at that point in time. And, it's middle of winter, you're in your house 24/7, the furthest from your imagination could be pop-up bike lanes and what they look like. And, everyone's there sort of, oh, they're doing it in Paris. Oh, they're doing it in London. Oh, wonderful. Oh, it's got to be 2.4 versus 2.6. Oh, we can't go down here. And it's freezing cold. You've got a kid under your thing. It's just, you're in your pyjamas, always in your pyjamas. And so we went through this process, and I go back to that because Will brought it up, and it sort of reminds you about what's successful. Our clients, the DOT staff, they were doing exactly the same thing. We were going back and forth. Can we get this agreed? How big is this going to be? What's going to be, the sort of metrics? And then, so we fast forward, and the project goes on, and there's a sort of a few things that turns a project into a really great project. And I learnt this at Transport for London is, even if it's a crap project, tell everyone it's a great project. Absolutely. And I tell you what, the pop-up bike lanes are the best project in the world. Okay, and if Paris and London, ours are a lot better. And it is part of that. It is the success that we need to create behind cycle initiatives. And I think if you look at what Heidelberg Road has done, particularly Heidelberg Road, is it's taken bike planning. Not to the next level, because the City of Melbourne doing fantastic stuff, absolutely fantastic stuff, but it is giving a level of confidence behind the links that we know we need in Melbourne in a way that is appealing to a massive audience. And when we talk about massive audience, we're seeing a rise in a whole lot of people that weren't cycling and weren't using the road for cycling, and that's fantastic, and we're hearing the feedback. But there's a couple of backings to why it is a success, and I think one of the important things, and we often sort of hear this in a sort of a quasi-hidden way, is, the objective was clear. And really I remember middle of winter and some dodgy PowerPoint slides, it was about relief of the public transport city and getting people into the CBD. And you look at Heidelberg Road and it's a very clear corridor for that. And that carried us through some pretty, people wanting to go down side routes, wanting to go around here, go on shared paths, go everywhere. And actually you get that clarity of thinking when you have a really easy objective that you can understand and passes you through. So then there's a whole lot of things about the design matters and the mindset that you talked about as well, which is, people have to shift to making stuff happen as opposed to saying, no, it can't happen. And one of the great things about the pop-up bike lanes is we didn't have to do a lot of modelling. We didn't have to do that modelling. There was a little bit of modelling done, but it all came afterwards and all goes to consultation and trial and error.
Yeah, it's great. Well, just made me think of a quote I was reading today, that rebuilding after a pandemic is is as much philosophical as it is practical. And I think that, really resonates in a way. It's about changing our behaviour, thinking about things in a different way, as much as it is, rolling out outdoor dining and pop-up bike lanes and those types of things. But yeah, we're going to get a bit philosophical later on, so I'll leave that there for the moment. Barb, I want to come to you now to ask about play streets. So this is temporarily closing off residential streets so that kids can play and neighbours can meet. And there's a fantastic project that Play Australia are running, so Barb's been involved in this across Australia, that's doing just that at the moment. So Barb, I want to just ask you about that project. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what's happening with 1,000 Play Streets?
This project began well before COVID, and the purpose of it was to get people into their streets. As I'm probably the oldest person here tonight, and so I remember people my age played in the street all the time, wherever it was that we grew up. And then, of course, the decades went by and all of a sudden, for all the reasons that we know about, it stopped. And our interest was the health and well-being of young people. And so what we saw during COVID was that, in fact, all that families had was really the open space around near where they were, because they were able to go outside. And so whilst our program was temporarily suspended across the country, given the various stages of lockdown, it's resuming, and we're more committed to it than ever, because we have to get people to be able to own their local areas. Now, I was a councillor with the City of Melbourne 30 years ago, and I then was very unhappy about the way councils seem to think that if they make a local law, they can decide what people do in their own neighbourhoods and vicinities. And they do it even more so now, which just about drives me crackers as a resident of North Melbourne of 40 years. And so, yes, we have to be able to make sure that people can make decisions about their own use of public space. And it's interesting to observe that there's some research going on out at Monash University at the moment about the public's views about participation in physical activity. And what they're finding is that people generally do not want to be told that if you want to use a golf course, like I think the Northcote Golf Course, you have to be a member. Now, this may not be a good example because I think it's a public club, but when you think about how much of our prime open space in this country is taken up by the rich and famous who either own it or have ownership of private clubs everywhere, most people are denied access to that. And, whether it's beaches, whether it's mountaintops, wherever it is, most people are denied access to it. And so I'm hoping that coming out of this, I don't believe that any of our governments will be brave enough to start to look at the regulations that allow corporate ownership of public space. But in fact, I would hope that all of us join various campaigns to demand access. So back to 1000 Play Streets, we are wanting kids and families to be able to use their local spaces when they choose to do so. And councils do make it so difficult. I won't bore you with the details. The Mullins City Council is very much better than any other council I know of. I think you just have to, Alicia, you just have to get a permit once a year, don't you? Which is fabulous. Most other councils, you have to get a permit for every time you want to use your street. Now, I say to people, do you really want to do that, or do you just want to get the bins out and put them in a place where the cars won't come? Why is it that there is no issue around injury, safety, concern in Holland? You see signs all over the place where you'll see a person on a bike, a person in a car, and a kid playing, and everybody just shares. They don't have signs everywhere saying what you can't do. They have a sign indicating this is a shared space. So I would hope that in the City of Melbourne, which I guess is what we're talking about largely tonight, that we will be able to see a real advancement, because, again, I was around when we began postcode 3000, and the aim was to get 3,000 people living in the city. We reckon there are many, many more. We're not quite sure how many, but 30, 40, 50,000 children live in this city. Jeff Kennett once said that he didn't think that they would, but in fact they do, interestingly enough. And so we have to think about children and children's capacity to use their space. And bikes, when you were talking about bikes before, where do kids ride bikes in the City of Melbourne? If you're a pedestrian, you're likely to get killed by a cyclist these days in the city. It's what I've noticed. Where do kids ride their bikes? So I just ask us all to think about kids and families and people who have them.
Thanks, Barb. It's great, and some really, really interesting points there. And I think, we have so much road space in our cities and so much parking space. I mean, even this fabulous venue is a great example of that. So yeah, you could ride around here if you're a kid. But yeah, I mean, it's such a great point, and yeah, how can we use these spaces in a better way? Particularly now that we've shaken things up a little bit with COVID. So Matt, let's come over to you. I want to have a chat now about what we call edge spaces in cities. So connection with our neighbours is so important in times of a crisis, and I think many of you would have noticed this, since COVID. I know we got to know our neighbours a whole lot better. Matt, I want to hear from you about placemaking and how since COVID we've seen more people contributing to public space in their neighbourhoods. In a time where we were physically distant and isolated in our homes, we saw people connecting in new ways that we haven't really seen, so much of until now. One of the things you published on last year was on edge spaces, so that kind of space between the private home and the public realm. We're talking about windows facing out to the street. We're talking about, balconies and verges and footpaths, those types of things. How were these spaces used during lockdown, particularly to connect with other people? And do you think people felt a greater sense of place in that time?
Great question, Alyssa. Thank you. I was just musing, Barb, on when Cat Stevens, when he was called Cat Stevens, wrote a little song called Where Do the Children Play? And it was a long time ago, and here we are, all these years later, thinking about the same issues and pondering those questions. And I think there's, from me, a level of sadness, that it's taken a global pandemic and all this suffering to actually get us to the point where we can have this discussion. And I think that says a lot about our city-making processes, and I'm getting to the question here, because our minds have become so rigid about what a city or a suburb should be in Australia, yeah? And if we are so rigid in our minds, our systems and the ways our cities don't evolve, yeah, become set in concrete. I think a couple of the things that have prevented us from embracing edge spaces, and I'll go into why they're important in a moment, and what we mean by that are the absolutely rigid adherence to the cadastral boundaries, the subdivisional boundaries of private land ownership in this country. The fact that we see the fence or the end of a building as a boundary that is impermeable, that, nothing shall meet beyond here. And the fact that road space is so sacrosanct for the private automobile. I mean, Australian cities are effectively developed in the time of the private automobile, like nowhere else in the world pretty much, apart from other settler colonial nations invaded, or use that word, at a similar time. So this leads to some particularly unique dynamics. And one of those is about the edge spaces, the spaces between buildings. And one of the reasons we talk about placemaking, or it's become a buzzword, misused sometimes, is that the spaces between buildings that have developed since, say, the 1960s in the Western world are just, frankly, appalling, right? Often devoid of life, almost quite deliberately. And so we've had to have this idea that it's somehow radical that we should inhabit these spaces again and bring life into them. And what the hell? Who brings life into a street, or who brings life into a courtyard between two buildings? What a radical kind of thought. So it's the idea that we bring meaning to these spaces that we inhabit. We make them interesting to connect in, because the reality of all this is that place is something we actually can't escape, right? We're always in place. And places are nested within each other. I'm sitting here and Helen is sitting there, and we're in different places theoretically, but we're within this car park. So there are always edges and permeable elements within connections to places, but our rigid thinking about city making, the way we've conceived of boundaries, has effectively shut those off. And this means that we're denied of one of the essential human impulses that I think is a permanent thing, because it will always be in the human psyche, this desire to connect, not just to each other, but but to and within the places that we inhabit. And I think a couple of panellists have alluded to this so far, that the places we inhabit are not just the first place, the home, or the second place, the workplace, though the two have kind of blended for some of us, and for some of us, the second place almost is the first place. I know, Helen, you times like that. But we also dwell and live and inhabit and connect in the third places. And it's the edges between those first and third places in particular that became quite interesting during lockdown last year in many suburbs. So who in the audience saw a teddy bear in the window last year and thought, oh, that's novel, that's nice? A few of you, yeah? Who saw some chalk drawing on the footpath? Or random free things, acts of generosity, we'll call them. So this is this kind of sudden reclamation of these edge spaces, these spaces between buildings, when we're forced to connect with them in some way, yeah? When our scale of relating to the world comes back to what is directly around us. And this is a human primal urge that's always there, right? And maybe these terrible events that precipitated last year actually brought us to start reckoning with this again before we actually plunge back into, I think, a person I won't name used the word snapback last year, yeah? Before we go back into an existence of more transient commuting and travel that prevents us from engaging in these kinds of gestures to connect with and in the world around us. So I'm hoping we can embrace that humanity again in some way.
Yeah, fantastic. And yeah, hopefully we see more of these things, this kind of creeping out from from people's houses into the streets, because we feel like we have some ownership over that as a community. Thanks, Matt. All right, let's shift a little bit now. You've heard lots of examples of what's been happening over the last year, and it's fantastic to hear all the great things. Let's get to some learnings, some things that we really want to salvage from the last year and all of these temporary experiments. It's interesting, it's coming at all different scales. It's in people's windows, from the front of your house out on the street to, entire bike lanes that are being rolled out through multiple suburbs. And it's also coming from all different types of kind of people and actors. It's not just coming top down from state government or local government, but we've definitely seen that. It's also coming from businesses wanting to do things, right outside their shop. It's coming from community members as well. So there's this real, scale of things happening at the moment. Helen, I want to come over to you to kind of talk about this one a little bit more, because, for decades, particularly planners and designers, but, community members as well, have really pushed for some of these tactical interventions with a lot of, fierce resistance almost. Some of you might remember the Skipster incident from Co-Design Studio. Let's not get into that. Why do you think there's been such a shift in our attitudes towards the temporary? And what's the benefit of temporary as a change method?
I think, as I was saying before, I think the shift in mentality has been it's necessity is the mother of invention. We've been forced this year to say yes to things and keep going, and these temporary spaces have helped us adapt. But I guess what I'm, maybe thinking about what we're going to happen after this, and like the question Matt posed to us to think about that is sort of viewing them as experiments, because I think looking around the room and just how many people look familiar to me, I'm assuming a lot of people are urban planning people or people just passionate about cities. And a lot of the things we've tested out in the last year are things that probably people in this room have desperately loved to have tested out previously, and they're really hard to do. And Matt mentioned that idea that, we are sort of stuck in a certain way of viewing the city and lots of city spaces. And I'm not saying that, every car space is bad and every car park is bad and every road needs to be taken out for cars. But it's just like we're so stuck in thinking about that fixed view that we can't visualise anything different, like whether it's a play space or a bike lane. So I really hope that what we take from this experience is being more open to experimenting to disrupt those ideas about how we think about things. And I guess from my previous and current research, I'm interviewing city professionals, particularly change agents, like people who are really desperately going, the city is just not climate. We can't have this kind of city with climate change facing us, or with children and their health issues facing us. We need to change our cities, but the thing we're really stuck with is we just don't know how to make that change happen. And with a community that sort of view perhaps our collective unconscious is to view cities in a certain way, it's just so hard to make that change happen. So based on the conversations I've had over the last sort of 10 years, there's some really key things, and just looking at even like cases like New York and what they've done, turning roads into public open space. There's lots of things that have been learnt from this as a method of change. So, being able to test it out before you invest it's a cost-effective way of building cities rather than, building a bike lane in the wrong place. You can gather the data now to work out whether that's worth investing. You gather the data to convince the community that it's worth investing in. We've seen more women on bikes, more kids on bikes using these pop-up bike lanes because they feel safer. So I think that's a key thing of just testing things out. But the thing that I have found really interesting from the research is how it helps people navigate change. In our daily lives, if you stop someone on the street and say, "Can I rip up part of your road and put a bike lane in?" They're top of mind. They're busy. They've just got the kids from school and they're COVID safing something, and everything else in their life. They're not really thinking about that in a considered way. So the sort of top of mind response is always to sort of, I guess, say no or to be resistant from that. And I think what the experimentation does is gets people in a playful sense of mind where they are not going to just instantly say yes. If you say, just hold on with your concerns, we're just going to do it for a week. And if you don't like it, we'll take it out. And from everyone I viewed in New York, which is probably the most controversial changes in this space, they said that nobody was ever upset with the outcome. They never took anything out. They fixed things. They shifted things around. They learned that maybe a couple of people were still a bit concerned at the end, but the majority of people went, all the things I was fearful of didn't eventuate. So it just kind of disarmed people's natural response to change, which I think is kind of this critical barrier that all the urban planning professionals trying to make cities more livable, more sustainable are facing. So I think it's that ability to help people navigate change is really the critical thing, and help them visualise change. Because the other thing you might say is we're going to do outdoor dining, and they're like, it sounds, it's going to get in my way, whatever they think that's going to be. You can't visualise that, but a temporary experiment visualises it for you. It does the work for you. You can walk down a street and say, like Ligon Street. I walked down Ligon Street over Christmas and thought, wow, this feels like Europe. Like, this is lovely. Like, I could experience this and really be on board with that vision in a way that if you just explained it to me when I'm on my way rushing to something, I would probably think, oh, no, what are you wasting taxpayers' money on? The kind of classic kind of responses you get. So I just think there's lots of opportunities in this. As you obviously can't do a temporary version of a level crossing removal, but there's a lot of things you can test out. Yeah, that'd be interesting to try that out. But
Catapult?
Sorry?
Catapult? A catapult for the trains? Is that the way?
Yeah, maybe.
Or cars? Yeah.
Test it out, yes. But you can bring that mentality of experimentation to a whole bunch of other ideas, whether it's a pop-up thing or not. But I think that's helping people manage change, I think, is going to be really critical.
Yeah, it's that's fantastic. Thanks, Helen. I think, so much in there in your response. I was just looking at Yarra City Council's survey that they put out to businesses, they're still going. Outdoor dining survey for businesses. It's public, it's up on their website. And 83% of businesses said it enabled them to keep trading, having outdoor dining, which is amazing. So 83%, that's huge. 96% said it enabled them to keep their staff. And, I think it's funny because businesses, particularly with parklets before COVID, are often the ones that are very resistant because it takes out car parking spaces. So it's really fantastic to see that by kind of trialling and, it's a softer approach in a way. You can roll it out and you can say, look, if it doesn't work, that's fine. We can take it back again. And often in that process, people's attitudes change and they really, get on board and start advocating for it because they want it to stay. So this might be a good point to come to you, Will. I know Mullins City Council's just put out their survey. So if you live in Moreland or you've dined in Moreland, you can go on and say you really want to keep them, keep the parklets. But I guess Yeah, I mean, I want to come to you to talk about this idea of kind of test and trial. And you've been place manager at Mullins for probably nearly a decade, I think now, and you've done lots of urban stuff in that time. Some temporary stuff that's become very, successful, permanent public places as well. But yeah, do you think this is a smart way for local governments to do things? This kind of test and trial, measure, test and trial.
In a word, yes, I do. And Sonny, my manager, is here, so let's do more of this. Yeah, awesome. But I think one of the points to make, and picking up on what you said, Helen, is it's not necessarily always cheaper at the same time, and it's actually not easier for the staff either. It's actually
Pick your battles.
probably harder. But the point is that you're aligning stakeholders. That's the main point, is that you're actually bringing people along with you on the journey, because it's very easy to look at a feasibility study or, some theoretical stuff and just go, nah, not that one. Next, move on, next one. But if you're actually demonstrating, like you say, hey, here's what it looks like, here's how it works. First of all, you immediately flush out the people who are going to be against it. They come out right away, in my experience. They'll tell you immediately that it's a terrible idea and you should stop it right away or we're going to sue you. That happens quite often. But also you bring out the people who kind of go, yeah, this is great. What's the problem here? And these are the people who would never respond to a survey because we're all time poor, We're not going to go online, find a survey and respond to it, although do it tonight when you go home on the morning survey. So it's just a way of demonstrating, going, yeah, look, this is what it is. It's not that revolutionary. It's not that hard. It's converting some road space to public space, for people. So I think that's the main benefit of it, really, is aligning the stakeholders and getting everyone together. As I say, it's not necessarily easier for the people who do it. It's probably harder. And the cost thing, I'm not certain on either. Maybe it is cheaper if you say, I'm going to trial this thing and then we're not going to do it. And I guess that is a saving. But if I'm going to trial this thing, then I'm going to build it. Probably from a pure dollars perspective, it's probably more expensive. But it's actually more sustainable then if you build that support in that trial period, that everyone goes, yeah, I like this, I was involved, I saw the trial, I had my say, I feel part of that. I feel part of the city now.
And you can make adaptations as well. So if you keep something, you can actually
That's
make
right.
some tweaks rather than have all the cement poured.
Yeah,
early
correct.
on.
Because there's no way, even the best designers in the world, all respect to them, they don't get it right every time. Of course they don't. And it's a chance to experiment and go, well, actually we need to, tweak this slightly to allow people to have a better chance to have their say and feel part of what's going on.
Will Fuchs, do you feel the same way with pop-up bike lanes? Do you think this is a good way to do things in that you can, I know there's, some really great measurement and evaluation at the moment of the pop-up bike lanes. Do you think this is a good way to do things in that you can kind of test and trial, measure, see what works?
Yeah, I think like the other Will, it's not to be underestimated as well, and I think increasingly it's probably not to be underestimated. And I think one of you mentioned it, Helen, on enabling change. I'll get yourself to put in yourself in the shoes of a traffic engineer with 20 years' experience last February, and you're sitting at your desk and you're planning for the same amount of traffic, and then March comes and the traffic starts to dissipate, and then April comes and there's no one on the road, and pretty much the roads are empty, and you've got two choices at this stage. You can say, this is an opportunity to do something different and to plan a different way. And here's all these planners who are saying there's all this fantastic stuff we can do around place, and here's all these people writing stuff on the pavement, putting teddy bears, it's fantastic. Or you could say, hey, I read an article in the UK which saw a 120% increase in traffic when they're coming back, so there's nothing that we can do on the road network. Now that is a really, that's a quote from a traffic engineer, not on the bike lane project, on another project. And that was the mindset, that was their mindset. And so part of the tactical urbanism and the evaluation is what it is an enabler of change. And it's like an insurance policy. So we'll put this in, but we'll monitor it, we'll measure it, we'll understand it, and we'll change it. And that's a massive insurance policy to allow things to progress through. If you don't have that, you get on a really negative mindset. One of the other things, and we did a lot of surveys for a council, and the council had some good schemes and some bad schemes, and some of their schemes were actually ripped out. The surveys came back, and if you looked at these surveys from a place perspective, they were fantastic. People loved the pop-ups they had. It was incredible. It was like 95% of people said we want them. If you looked at it from a transport planner perspective, it was horrible. People were driving like 1 kilometre to get to these shops. It was like, no, we can't have that. But the reality is that people were visiting their local shops. We'd taken 5 car parking spaces, so I call it a win. But if you look across it, you've got to build on that success, and that's what the evaluation created, where they tried to go too far too quickly, it got pulled out and they didn't go forward. The final bit, and that's this sort of idea of perfect, is with the Heidelberg bike lanes, is what we've got now is, it's really successful. We haven't gone back to work fully. We'll start going back to work. There's already 30% more cyclists along there. There's 30% more women along there. It's really sort of got some momentum. But the real interesting thing that it's done is now, so we're working in regional Victoria and a couple of cities, and it's changed pop-up lanes to being a shovel-ready project. And anyone heard of a shovel-ready project? Does anyone know what a shovel-ready project is?
I believe I heard it on Utopia a few times.
Well, it's about right. It's about right. So at about March last year, April, I started thinking, what the hell is a shovel-ready project? Because people are going to start paying for shovel. And a shovel-ready project is just something you can get done really quickly. So these are all become shovel-ready projects. So suddenly you've got this sort of process of evaluation that has disrupted the norm, which a shovel-ready project is basically put in traffic lanes or resurfacing the most boring projects. But now we're talking about Wodonga, Wangaratta, these people having pop-up bike lanes, but we are going through this evaluation and the insurance policy that comes, and it's still not easy, but it's happening.
Thanks, Will. It's fantastic. Barb, let's have a quick chat again about play streets because, again, using road space and, some of the learnings I think that are coming out from the 1,000 Play Streets project. So there's a, bunch of councils around Australia that are trialling this at the moment and it's being evaluated by La Trobe Uni, which is great. And I think you set out with this project very much thinking there might be, multiple closures of streets and, it became very difficult trying to keep closing off streets with local government. And I think one of the things that were coming out was about informality. So, you touched on this a little bit before, just encouraging people to pull the bins out on the street. But yeah, I'm just wondering, what are some of those learnings that are coming out from 1,000 Play Streets? What can we take from this?
The most significant one by a country mile is that community connectedness is absolutely essential. And we've learned this very much from our project in South Australia. And it's interesting to think about how people live in a suburban street these days, because I'm now aware that so many people live in a suburban street and they have no idea who lives in their street. So if they walk along the street with their new baby, nobody says hello to them because they don't know them. And you can't think about children playing outside unless you actually think of community connectedness. And so what does that mean in terms of temporary? Closing streets and using public space, in spite of what the signs might say about keeping off the grass or keeping off here or keeping out of there, is a terrific thing to do, and it is very temporary. I think what needs to become far more permanent is local government, I know much better, I guess, than state government, is that local governments need to have policies about these things, because so often people who are doing the kinds of things that we're talking about tonight are fairly junior in the hierarchy of things, particularly when you're dealing with engineers and traffic engineers and those kinds of characters. And I think that councils need to be having a policy. I want the City of Moreland to have a policy that says the purpose of having the Moreland City Council is to look after its people And we're going to do that by doing all of these various things. Now, councils just don't have those kinds of policies. Sometimes you see words written in strategic plans and what have you, but they actually need to be big, big policies. And so then people who object to them have got to understand that this is the policy of the municipality in which they live. You'll have been as excited as I was to see in the primary school in East Brunswick this week that's closed off cars coming near the school. Now, when I went to primary school, mothers didn't have cars, for goodness sake. We all rode our bikes from the age of 5. Now, I'm not suggesting that there aren't issues around traffic issues. Of course there are. But there are so many ideas. One of the ideas that we're exploring is to try to get parents to drop their kids in a park that might be half a K, say, away from a school. Everyone has a bit of a play and a coffee and a connect. Kids skate, walk, ride to school, repeat the exercise at the end of the day. Imagine if we could get 80% of families doing that in a permanent way. So the temporary needs to be looked at from the point of view of how can we enable it to go on.
Fantastic, Barb. I love it. And it's really just about putting people at the heart of cities. Yeah. All right, audience, we're coming to you in a little bit. There's probably 2 more questions I'm going to fire at the panel, and then if you've got anything, get it ready. I just want to let's get philosophical for a bit, Matt. I'm coming over to you.
Let's get metaphysical.
We've talked a bit how place itself is bound in both the temporary and the permanent, and this kind of constant balance of essence and becoming. How has 2020 changed the relationship for us between permanent and temporary?
Yeah, I could try and distill 40, 50 odd years of theory and philosophy on place, and I've ended up in some very interesting and difficult conversations doing so. But essentially, the dance between the temporary and the permanent kind of always happens in place, yeah? Every place has a kind of, I call it an essence, that makes it distinctive from other places and gives us some kind of emotional affectation in response. Just think of a place that you care about or that's special to you, and you'll know that feeling, yeah? You'll know that kind of essence that comes from the binding up of story and materiality and action and lived experience. But places also, it's never completely static. It is open and becoming and so on. So, the tree outside your house might grow to the point that it gets birds' nests in it one day, and then that place becomes a different thing that holds a nest of birds and maybe a clutch of eggs and who knows what else. So I think in that dance between the temporal and the permanent, we do well to consider here First Nations wisdom in this country. And as a settler, I'm certainly not purporting to speak on behalf of that knowledge, but all we really need to do as the settlers among us is to open our ears and read about the potency of ideas like country, and this idea that it is always fluid and becoming, but is a living entity, a web of interlinked and interdependent forces and life forms that we are a part of. And so what happens if we start thinking that every action that we make, everything we do in place, either fosters this kind of web of interconnectedness or breaks it? And I just pause on that point because I think it fundamentally sits against what 230 odd years of settler colonial interaction with place that doesn't come from place itself, but comes from an idea that we can mould and build over place in permanent ways so as to exploit it for remarkably temporary ends, in the end. I think it really starts to undermine that kind of thinking. Earlier on I mentioned that I was a little bit sad that we're only having this discussion after a global pandemic. We kind of forget quite quickly that in January last year, many of us were asphyxiated by bushfires such that the world had rarely seen before, yeah, and the huge ecological destruction that wrought across this country, the stories of grief, and maybe we inhaled some of that grief ourselves with that smoke that came through here, yeah. But I keep wondering, if this isn't the moment when the wheel turns, what will be? And I thought that was really sad that maybe we were punch drunk from the sheer gravity of the ecological collapse in motion, if you like. I know I certainly was. But if those moments, we keep getting these warnings from the earth, from the world around us, about how we relate to place, how we destroy that which nourishes us so willingly, yeah? And I just keep wondering how we might actually respond to it. And if we think that place actually holds us, it holds our stories, and that we are dependent on place, how then do we start acting and interacting towards it, and how do we support both its being and becoming?
Thank you, Matt. That's amazing, and I think so much in there for all of us to think about, and probably do some more reading in our own time, and to keep learning as well. So thank you. Right, panel. Just a question coming to any of you. What do we want to keep from this? We've talked through all of the different things that have happened over the last year. Lots of great qualities from the temporary. What are some of the qualities that we want to keep, or some of those practices that we hope to take forward?
I'll go. Thanks, Alyssa. I think it's just very briefly, it's just a mindset of yes, we can, to paraphrase Obama, yes, we can do this. There's nothing really substantive that's stopping us trying and doing this. And picking up what Matt says is like, are you building community or are you taking away from community? And that's the kind of key question you should ask with everything you're doing. I think that's great.
Love it. Thank you.
I'm happy to go to the audience and ask questions.
Are we ready, audience? Before we do, I've just got a question for you, because I think this is, hearing all of the things that have happened over the last year, it's extraordinary. We're at a really pivotal point. We haven't seen, so much kind of creativity and temporary ways of doing things before in this way. So I think we need to have a little collective moment to celebrate. I know that many of you in the audience have worked on these projects, often long hours, really like complex and difficult conditions during a pandemic. I know probably all of you have supported these in some way. So just to kind of shake things up before we come to you, for questions, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, and I'm going to get you to either give me a little kind of wave, happy hands, or a fist pump, or a high five. And I just want to hear from you. It's an easy one first. Who here in the audience has supported a temporary intervention over the last year? We're talking outdoor dining. Yeah, great. Pretty much everyone. The next one is for the workers out there. So people that have been working on these temporary interventions, working on outdoor dining or pop-up bike lanes, the designers, the urban planners, economic development. Give us a kind of air high five, a COVID-safe air high five, and for each other too. There's probably half of us here, so thank you and well done. It's a mammoth effort. And the last one, this one's going to come with a little fist pump and a yay. Tell us if you love temporary interventions and you want some of these to stay in the city. Cool. I think that's pretty much everyone. It's amazing. Thank you. So over to you, audience, for questions. And we're going to do this. Yeah, this comes in a COVID-safe way. So you'll get a microphone that's been wiped down. You can... and if you do have a question, if you can just raise your hand or stand up, and we'll wait till the mic comes round.
Thanks for letting me have the first question. It's always a lot of pressure. Having worked in this space for nearly 20 years, and finally being able to see some of it actually get built is just amazing and but also discouraging. Like you were saying, that it's taken a pandemic for it to get to this point, to be able to actually see some of the strategies and policies we've been working on come to fruition. So my question is, a lot of you have described projects that have taken a political will to actually see them get delivered. You've talked about starting with a yes, being able to build it and then evaluate, as opposed to having to evaluate and then do a bit more evaluation before then getting told no. And so, I'm kind of keen how we can take the learning from this and take it into that political sphere to be able to maintain that momentum of being able to keep getting that yes at the front and being able to test and learn in that way.
Yeah, I'll have a crack. So I don't think you're ever always going to get political support for everything you want to do. So that's probably, but I think one of the things that that this did was there was a lot of people who said, we're up for this opportunity. Like consistently at all levels, everyone was up for that opportunity. But I think Will mentioned it, and I think this was consistent. Half the parklets and half the schemes weren't finished when they were put out. So there was a lot of acceptance of imperfection. And I think as professionals, we can potentially accept imperfection to allow our politicians to be more accepting of a change. And so, I'll use the example of a town centre, the one everyone drove to. If we're accepting of their imperfections of driving, and that's something that we can work on from 95% who drive 1 kilometre, which is, as obscene as it seems, to actually saying you're enjoying the place. I think that's probably the step that we can take to move this through to the next stage. That's one view on it.
I don't know if this helps answer your question, but I guess pre-COVID, some of the people I was interviewing about this kind of stuff around the world were saying that, this is going to probably sound the wrong way, but that testing things out meant that, if it went well, the politicians would take ownership of it. If it went badly, they'd say, oh, well, the team did that and it didn't work, so they're removing it. I mean, they weren't throwing people under the bus, but they were just kind of distancing themselves and saying, oh, well, that was a team, that was a technical thing we were testing and we didn't like it. But if it was successful, they'd just go on in there and claim ownership for it. So I guess it's that thing about insurance policy you talked about before, or Will was talking about similar ideas of de-risking it, is that it lets you test something out, and if it doesn't work, you can, say it was a technical test, and if it works, you can. So I guess it kind of gives you, as much as it helps people deal with change, it helps maybe some of the politicians be a little bit braver. So we've got all the mics down this end. I'll just pass.
Helen, I think if a good idea comes off, it's always a politician's idea, isn't it? That's how the world works. I think there is something, I've seen many people in the audience who've done such fantastic work on these kinds of projects for many years, and I thank you for the question on that basis. So I want to pay tribute to you all and my fellow panellists who've done so much over such a long time. One of the things now is actually telling the stories of the lived experience and bottling what's happening so that we can keep telling those stories and we can keep hold of the essence of the good stuff, because it's a bit like the tactical urbanism idea, right? You keep building on these things, and I think now it's about capturing, building on these layers of story as part of an evaluation, because an evaluation isn't just a matter of, counting people who walk past or cycle past. It's observing the stories of people who actually sit down at these parklets and stop. Getting people to stop in place is vital to its vitality. So these qualitative stories are incredibly vital, and I know we've all done so much hard work, and that's some of the hard work that's going to have to continue, I'd suggest.
I think that I agree with all of those comments, but I think that a very hard thing to do is to connect the dots. And so the storytelling is really important part of evaluation, but from our perspective of thinking about kids and families being outside and trying to get healthier, we have to connect the dots, and that's what politicians can understand. I could tell you now that Australia is way down the bottom of the developed world in terms of health and well-being, and you would all read these statistics every time they come out, somehow or other to get politicians to answer your question, to get politicians to listen and make it a priority, we've got to connect the stories of the well-being of people who have been participating in the temporary activities and what that actually means in terms of people who get ill and go to hospital, people who need medical attention, because there are people who do this kind of evaluation, and I think that evaluation's really important.
Let's go for another question. Do you want it?
Thank you, Lucinda here from Neighbourhoods. And I just want to say thanks, because this feels like family in lots of ways, but I know like Will and Helen and actually all of you have been working on these issues not just in the last year but for the last decade, and it's really your hard work and dragging hay bales and standing up to police and dismissing permits that's really enabled this environment, and thank you for that, because it's really exciting. The tactical urbanism cycle, and I think, Helen, you were talking a lot about this tonight, is around, building and testing and measuring and then learning. And I'm interested within that cycle, in order for this kind of mindset of experimentation to be successful long term, like if you could have one metric that you could use to leverage change moving forward, like what is it that you would measure? I know there's a million things, but what's like the one standout? If you could use one metric, what would you take away?
Thanks, Lucinda. Is this market research? No, only joking. Yeah. One metric is, and it's not a straightforward one, political support. How do you get political support? That's a whole different question.
It's taking it slightly different from probably the measuring the stuff. I think for me, all my stuff's about people trying to make change happen. It's kind of like, how easy was it to make that change? Like, how comfortable, even if it wasn't a success and you pulled it out, like how easy was that? How gentle was that on the people who are trying to deliver these projects? I think you look at the scale of change and you think about your points around the temporariness of cities, and you think about all the challenges. I mean, look at Sydney at the moment. There's a lot of challenges happening there at the moment. Cities are going to change, and they're going to need to change more, and technology is going to mean cities change more. So I think our city professionals are going to have to do a lot of change. So I think how easy that is on them, I think would be a good metric to measure.
Community connectedness is mine.
I think it's money, to be honest. I think the bit that's missing in action is big spend in this space, and this is my point on the shovel ready. We spend millions and billions of dollars on crappy projects, and so if we could even get a little bit of that, like that's to Will's point, it's like once you get the political support and people see success, like this is a goldmine for politicians. So to see Canberra funding local, it's a game-changing one, and so I think it's money, and that's not just because I'm a consultant. It's
all the good stuff being considered shovel-ready.
What a thought. I'm going to take a different tack again, and Lucinda, you might like this, but the only constant, we talk about measuring different places using indicators. I'm not putting the word indicator in your mouth by any means, but this kind of idea of measuring what happens in place is often considered some kind of grail that we all work on, and often there's this want to reduce what happens in place to a set of quantitative numbers, yeah? And the danger with that is that we lose everything that makes place important to us. And we impose measures on different places that may not be suitable because they are not applied with a mind to context. So the only constant that I can think of after 3 years of research, pretty much, drum roll, is that place is always experienced and it always holds life. Okay, they're two, but they're entwined. Yeah, so looking at the experience and the capacity of place to hold life is... Sorry, I gave you two, right? That's where it is to me.
Thank you. That was such a great question and really, really interesting responses. We've already gone a few minutes over time, and I feel like I want to keep going out for more questions, but we need to wrap it up. So I have one last question for the panel. Is temporary the new permanent? Is it?
Well, I think I foreshadowed my view earlier when I said that place is always in a dance of transience and essence, the temporary and the permanent. Maybe the question now is what ought to be temporary and what needs to be considered permanent. And I would argue that the things we've privileged as permanent in the way that we treat place as from a settler colonial paradigm over the last 230 years must become temporary so that we can understand and really connect with, the permanent constants which are our need, our interdependent relationship with place, and the fact that we must therefore cultivate that so that place can hold life. That bit of First Nations wisdom, you will often read it in documents, you'll hear scholars talking about it, and Professor Mary Graham at the University of Queensland is one I've read a little bit on this. That expression that if you look after country, then country will in turn provide for us, and we need to listen to that kind of knowledge and make that a permanent part of our way of being as settlers in this land. Why, thank you.
Well said. Always tough to follow the philosophical with something else, but seeing good groundwork for further comments. But I think yes, temporary should become the new permanent. Embracing this idea of cities adapting and experimenting. I think if the last year has taught us to look at cities in a different way and look at spaces that have been fixed in their use for so long, if it opens our eyes to, I guess, seeing that in new eyes and embracing new methods of affecting change, I think that'd be a great permanent change for cities.
Helen said we disagree at the start. I think no, temporary is not the new permanent. I think, but what this has done and what it enabled people to explore is what is permanent and what is temporary and where the line sits, and it's challenged that distinction within our network because a lot of it is temporary, but many things are also permanent. So there's a line there that you can explore yourself.
I don't like permanent very much. What I've experienced in this country, ask women, and you ask Indigenous people and you ask poor people what's permanent, they're not keen on permanent. So I'm all for making permanent any temporary activity.
A hard one to follow up on, but just from a practical perspective, I agree with all the panellists, particularly the line. I know it's kind of a provocative question, but it's about blurring the lines between what's permanent and what's temporary, and then also giving people the license to say, actually, you can do something that only lasts for 6 months. That's allowed. It's okay. It's part of your toolkit. Keep going.
Thank you, everyone. Can we have a really big round of applause for our amazing panel? So many interesting insights tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along tonight. Again, very, very big thank you so much to all of our panellists, Will, Barb, Helen, and Matt. Thank you so much for your contribution tonight, but also for the amazing work that you've been doing and continue to do for our cities. So thank you.
And to you, Alyssa, for being a remarkable MC and for all the work you've done to make this happen.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, M Pavilion, for having us along tonight in this most amazing venue, the Parkade, and how great that we could have this discussion in a repurposed car park. There is a bar over there. Is it still open or is it? Oh no, you're going to have to go. You're going to have to find some amazing outdoor dining somewhere. I think Lily Black's was open, but please find a friend, go and have a great conversation. You can come say hi to the panellists, and thank you so much for coming along tonight.